So right now, and actually we've been dealing with avian influenza for about 2 years, a little over 2 years in the state of Colorado. And it certainly poses a threat to our poultry industry, primarily poultry industry. It's highly pathogenic, meaning that it causes a high level of mortality in our poultry operations. So our birds, things like chickens and turkeys and geese and ducks, those types of birds really are highly impacted by the virus. What we see on the dairy side is we've had now 4 confirmed detections of avian influenza in dairy operations, and it is impacting our dairy cattle. We are seeing dairy cattle that are becoming clinically sick from the disease. Fortunately, the dairy cattle are not dying from the disease. So it's impacting their milk production, it's impacting their health, but for the most part, they seem to recover clinically from the virus. So it's not causing mortality like we see in poultry. So I think overall, yes, the risk of highly pathogenic avian influenza is present in Colorado and is primarily concerning to our poultry and dairy operations at this time. We're currently recommending that both poultry and dairy premises implement biosecurity practices and that they implement really strong biosecurity practices. That looks very different depending on what type of operation you have. But mostly, biosecurity focuses on what steps can you put in place to make sure that virus does not come onto your farm. For our poultry operations, we really worry about wild bird exposure because right now, the wild birds are still carrying avian influenza that can impact our poultry operations. We also now have a concern that the avian influenza that's currently circulating in our dairy operations can also spill over into our poultry operations and cause disease on poultry operations. So when we talk about biosecurity for poultry, it's really implementing a lot of steps on those farms to prevent disease from entering that farm. And that can be looking at things like movement of animals, movement of people, movement of vehicles and equipment, anything that might be carrying the virus that could carry it onto a site, really implementing biosecurity practices. So things like making sure you're going through a truck wash with a vehicle before entering a facility, making sure that you're changing your boots and your clothing before coming into contact with animals. So in case you were in contact with birds at another facility, you don't bring that to a new poultry facility. On dairy operations, that becomes a little bit more complicated because there's a lot of movement, a lot of daily movement that happens on dairy operations. So we have a lot of resources out there that are available that walk through some of the standard biosecurity practices that we are asking all of our producers to implement. But really, it's just looking at any of those movements on and off the farm, what's the risk that they might be carrying virus with them and introducing that virus into the herd. Colorado Department of Agriculture and the State Veterinarian's office under me, that's where we've been leading the state response on high path avian influenza for the last 2 years, over 2 years, about 2.5 years at this point. What I'm really fortunate for is that we coordinate with a lot of different partners on this. We coordinate with a lot of state partners and federal partners and our industry partners as well. So we work with Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to ensure that we're protecting human health. And they monitor workers on farms that have confirmed cases of avian influenza because we want to make sure that humans are not becoming infected with this virus. We also work with United States Department of Agriculture. So at the federal level, we've got really good partners in place and we coordinate our response hand in hand with them. We also have a bunch of other partners here in the state. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we work with them on the wildlife side. So wild birds, wild mammals. They do a lot of surveillance and testing in the state. And then a lot of other state and federal agencies across the board. But in the state of Colorado, CDA is the lead agency for high path AI on the animal health side. So when this spillover event initially happened, what we've seen over the last couple of years, right, is we have this strain of virus, H5N1, has been circulating in the wild bird population for 2 years. And we know that spillover from wild birds into mammals is possible. That is something that we've had historically happen. We've had it spill over into a lot of different mammal species. Most of those have been wild mammals. So things like skunk and fox and coyotes. They've had seals infected in some of our sea or ocean states. But what we didn't, we have had spillover of avian influenza into dairy cattle before, but not like this. So we believe, and USDA has, after whole genomic sequencing was done and some epidemiology analysis was done, USDA believes that this initial spillover happened from a single wild bird into a dairy herd around December 2023. So somewhere in Texas, likely, it spilled over into dairy cattle. All of the movements subsequent to that, so everything else that we've had, all the other detections we've had in dairy cattle, has all been associated with direct movement from affected farms. So we've had movement of animals that have been moving the virus, so movement of animals that are infected, carrying the virus to new farms. And it can also be moved by people and vehicles and equipment. And that's why biosecurity is so, so important. So if we know a farm is infected, we want to make sure that the virus doesn't leave that farm. Now, we have not had any confirmed cases in the state of Colorado of this virus. We're working really closely with our public health partners. So they do monitoring of all of the exposed individuals on those farms, and they do symptom monitoring. So if there are any symptoms reported, of which we have not had any symptoms reported to us on any of our affected farms, then they would do follow-up testing if that were to occur. But we have not had that. CDC has still believes that the risk to the general public remains low. So to general public, there's no concern for movement of this virus at this time. It's really just for individuals that are on known positive facilities. We do symptom monitoring for them. So what we do here in the state of Colorado is we place affected dairy farms under a quarantine. That quarantine is very specific to limit the movement of lactating dairy cattle. So the farm is still operational. They're still able to milk cows. They just can't move any of their milking cows off of the facility. And so far, we've not had any of our herds that have been affected. We haven't had their production systems impacted tremendously by the terms of the quarantine. Workers, we have about 105 dairies in the state of Colorado with approximately 200,000 dairy cows total, but we don't track the total number of workers. So I think so. One of the requests that we've had is to make sure that any of the materials that we produce are also available in Spanish. So especially biosecurity resources, how can workers protect themselves? We are always making sure that all of those resources are available in Spanish as well.
Thank you.